But here's the thing. A lot of what is being called a concussion may not really be a concussion. Remember that concussions are traumatic brain injuries. Concussion symptoms can be caused by a number of other injuries, which can also be aggravated by contact. This introduces the question, is having concussion-like symptoms sufficient to diagnose a concussion? And in the same vein, what does the phrase concussion-like symptoms really mean? If we're confident it's a concussion, why not call them concussion symptoms? And if we're not, then what is the real issue here that is provoking these symptoms? Interestingly, the expert panel at the second International Conference on Concussion in Sport in Prague several years ago unanimously agreed that the overwhelming majority of concussions, in the realm of 80 to 90%, completely resolve in 7 to 10 days. So how do we explain the players that take drastically longer to recover than others? Sometimes it's clear that the symptoms will be more significant and the recovery longer based on the severity of the hit, but this is certainly not always the case. The problem with using concussion-like symptoms to diagnose a concussion is that it implies that simply resting will provide time for the symptoms to spontaneously resolve, which they often don't. Naturally, the question then is why? What often goes overlooked is the fact that concussion-like symptoms can be caused by a number of other issues, the main culprits of which are temporomandibular junction disorders or dysfunctions of the jaw, impingement of the occipital nerves, especially the greater occipital nerve where it exits between the first and second cervical vertebrae, which you can see in yellow in the picture here on the right, damage to or spasm of cervical soft tissue structures, which can include any of the muscles around the neck, and asymmetries in or disturbances to the visual system, some of which may have been problematic but overlooked before the injury. All of these injuries can also result from contact, which may be why so many players are sidelined with concussion-like symptoms that either didn't have a concussion to begin with or have a concussion that is healed but with symptoms that won't resolve. It's important to recognize that many hockey players have predispositions to these injuries that simply aren't typically addressed. These factors may make a player more prone to getting a concussion, more prone to having other injuries that cause concussion-like symptoms, and can be a cause of symptoms themselves. We'll talk about some of these predispositions in a second, but conceptually it's important to understand that if a player sustains a concussion from a hit, even after the symptoms resolve, or if the symptoms resolve, the predispositions may still be there, which may make it more likely for them to sustain a repeat injury. In other words, they may heal just enough to drop below their symptom threshold, but they're far from optimal. This can be a hard thing for people to understand. In general, symptoms are a sign that something is wrong, but a lack of symptoms doesn't necessarily mean that everything is right. In this case, the concussion is just superimposed over the contributing factors, and to ensure that the player recovers fully and to minimize the risk of a repeat occurrence, it's necessary to address all of the underlying factors, including those that may not cause symptoms. So with that in mind, let's talk about some of the more common predisposing factors.